It's difficult to do a show about Arsenal news and transfers when obviously you're given very harsh reminders about what in this world is just so much more important. But this is today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. You joined me here this morning down in the New Forest. Of course, I'm hoping that you can hear me and see me to as much of a degree as possible. The Wi-Fi is not amazing down here, as you can imagine, on the campsite. But I'm hoping that you can still see and hear me enough that I'm coherent and that everything's coming through all right. Yesterday was a very, very, very sad day, a very difficult day for particularly, of course, Liverpool Football Club, the Portuguese national team, and the friends and family of Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva, who very, very sadly were killed in a road traffic accident in Spain in the early hours of Thursday morning. I did the show yesterday, obviously, and this news at that point at 8 a.m. had not yet broken. We weren't aware of this news. It didn't become public until just after I began work, about 9 o'clock. In some ways, I'm quite glad that it didn't come out yesterday while we were doing the show, because I genuinely don't know how I would have reacted to such awful news. It was very difficult. And all that I could think of at the time was that if this is how I feel as somebody who has never met Diogo Jota, who is, even in the sphere of working in football and having obviously been quite close to Diogo Jota through mix zones or whatever, but never actually met and spoken with him. If this is how it makes me feel, I cannot fathom or imagine how those who are friends and family and close to a 28-year-old and a 26-year-old man. It's enlightening. It's very, very, very eye-opening, and it's perspective giving, I think, for all of us, and it makes you realize what things in this world matter. You think about some of the conversations we had yesterday about football, and football really doesn't matter in comparison to the things that really, really do. Football's just a game, but it does bring us closer, and it does produce some fantastic people. And anyone that I speak to who had, of course, met, worked with, played with Diogo Jota, there was never a bad word to say about him. I could never say a bad word about him from the perspective of a football fan, because the only bad words that I could ever say about Diogo Jota were always ones of envy and jealousy and frustration, because he had Arsenal's number. He knew exactly how to score against us. He was a thorn in Arsenal's side. He really, really, truly was. And I echo the words of what Harry said yesterday. I watched Harry's show. And I echo what he says, that whenever we would face Liverpool, I would always look for Diogo Jota's name on the team sheet, way before your Mohamed Salah's, your Virgil van Dijk's, your Trent Alexander-Arnold's. It would be Jota's name that I look for in that team, because he just knew how to play against us. I wrote a piece yesterday for Football London because, to be honest, when you're in a situation where you're having to write pieces, write articles every single day, and news like this breaks, it's very difficult to want to write about anything else or talk about anything else, because your mind becomes so consumed with this news. And I really hope that what I wrote yesterday landed the way that I intended, because I wanted to do a tribute to a player who I, as just spoken about, was always very envious of, was always very jealous that we were not the team that had him, and appreciated him for his footballing ability. Rest in peace, Diogo Jota and Andre Silva, and what I'm sure is an unfathomable time for your family, that they have the strength to get through this period and will have the footballing world and beyond hoping and helping all the way through as well. So it is Friday, the 4th of July, here in the New Forest. I'm hoping from the sounds of it, you can hear and see me fine, and you can hear and see what I'm saying, which is a good thing. I'm here today, I'm here tomorrow, so you'll have these surroundings as usual. The sun is ridiculously bright. I've managed to get the sunroof to be able to block that part of it out, but I'm hoping that the visuals aren't too chaotic, caused by the sun. There's also the chance that somebody could come over to the window and knock on it and say, "What the hell are you doing?" Which has happened in the past on the show. Someone's come over and been like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Just doing a podcast." And they're like, "Well, we thought you were sleeping in your car." Well, I'm not, but that could happen as well. So just be aware that we're in a very uncontrolled environment here. I'm not in the comfort of my studio or my office, so it's difficult to know what could happen. There's no deers around this morning, unfortunately. They're in like one of the other fields, so I can't show you that, as we have done in previous years when we've been down here for the annual holiday of my family-in-law. But good morning to you all in the chat box. Really appreciate you listening. I haven't really got a very stable place to put the laptop either, so anytime I actually try and touch a button, it can be quite difficult. But good morning to Pat and Glenn and James, to Barney and Mark, Matt G, Rowan. Good morning to you all. We've got Tom and Temmie. We've got PJ, Sean, Carl, Tyrell, Stevie. Good morning to you and plenty others as well. Now, we've got a lot to get through, and I haven't got a lot of time. So really going to have to try and fly through as many of this as possible and try and take some of your comments as well. We begin here, I think. Yes, we certainly do. We've talked about the very sad passing of Diogo and Andre. But we move now to Arsenal's news, and we begin with Gabriel Heinze, which I assume is the correct way of pronouncing it. I don't think it's Gabriel Heinze. It sounds a bit weird saying Heinze. I think when he was playing for Manchester United when I was a youngster, I used to say Heinze, but I think it's Heinze. Gabriel Heinze is set to replace Carlos Cuesta as Arsenal's brand new assistant coach. Of course, Carlos Cuesta left Arsenal for Parma, and we wish him all the absolute best in what is an opportunity of a lifetime already for him at 29 years of age. But Gabriel Heinze joining the club, of course, another defender, another left-back joining Arsenal. He is, I can't say I know too much about him from a coaching perspective. I know he's a little bit of a live wire. I'm sure that we'll see some, if Arsenal score, of course, or concede, we might see some pretty emotional scenes, perhaps, on the touchline, because he can be quite exuberant, of course, in how he speaks and how he acts. So I'm looking forward to this. Could be a lot of fun. And interested to see what he does at the club this season. Moving forwards, though, a report by James Nicholas in The Athletic has suggested that Tomiyasu, one of the directors and executives and recruiting experts at Juventus, is not going to be joining Arsenal this summer. And instead, James Ellis is also set to become the new technical director at Arsenal. Of course, the technical director position he is a person, of course, who has been the position, of course, has been something previously held by Edu. That was the role that he first had at the club as well, and then, of course, moved into the role of sporting director. Well, James Ellis, who some had reported, and this kind of shows you how much things can change beyond reality. There were reports at the beginning of the window that he was leaving. This is not the case. I don't know. I can't remember who it was that reported that, but that has never been the actual case of this either. But the technical director role, while you have a sporting director, will be there to help and support the sporting director, effectively being like the number 2, if you will, in that position, like an assistant coach to Arteta. We've got something of an assistant sporting director in some ways with the technical director role with more responsibilities. So James Ellis will be taking on that role, but Tomiyasu will not be joining Arsenal from the sounds of it. Now, Saudi clubs are preparing to offer Takehiro Tomiyasu a potential route into football beyond Arsenal. There are wide reports, first broken by Hand of Arsenal, of course, that Arsenal are in mutual discussions in order to terminate the contract of Takehiro Tomiyasu early so that he can secure a move this summer away from the club and find a new home. Now, we know, of course, that he is continuing his rehabilitation after undergoing knee surgery at the start of the year. It is very, very, very sad to see this end this way. And yeah, I'm gutted about it. Genuinely, I'm gutted that he's leaving or left the club already. You know, it's certainly Charles Watts has been speaking this morning as well, saying he's to leave the club, and Sammy Mokbel keep saying them out, of the BBC is also leaving the club. But Sammy Mokbel says here, Arsenal defender Takehiro Tomiyasu has left the club after reaching a settlement to terminate his contract earlier last month. The deal expired in 2026 with an option for a further 12 months. Tomiyasu is expected back from his knee surgery in 4 to 5 months. I wish him genuinely all the very best, because he never deserved what he has gone through as a player. He was, when he was fit, such a solid option for us. A versatile defender who offered strength and speed and defensive security, a strong passer. Wasn't necessarily known for his contributions in the final third, but he was such a solid player. And the fact that he has gone through everything that he has gone through, the injuries. I remember doing a press conference with him where he was speaking about how he was so happy to be over his issues, and very sadly, of course, suffered another one not soon after. I can't imagine the mental toll that he would have gone through, of course, as somebody. I can't imagine what he must have gone through as a player. I know he would have had a lot of really good people, at least I hope, around him. As a Japanese player as well, he had a grasp on the language to agree. I had a few conversations with Tomiyasu during his time in England. But yeah, very, very difficult, I think, to get much in the way of this decision. I think it's a decision that obviously had to be made, a decision that's best for both the player and the club. And hopefully now from this point, he can go on and have a very solid career. And when he returns from this injury, he will hopefully be in a much better position to take that next step. So fingers crossed that's the case. Ethan Nwaneri. This is an interesting story that also dropped this morning, courtesy of James McNicholas on The Athletic. Nwaneri's contract talks with Arsenal are considered to be, and these are James's words, at a delicate stage. It's a bit of a nervous period right now. Now, we've been here before. It's worth pointing out with Nwaneri. There's been periods in Nwaneri's career where we really thought he was going to go. We really thought he was gone. And then he ended up staying, and it all sounded like he never wanted to go. The positive side of this story is that, as James reports, Nwaneri doesn't want to go. He wants to stay at Arsenal. It is now about coming to an agreement with the player on his contract. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty confident that Miles Lewis-Skelly's scenario and the contract that's been negotiated with Miles Lewis-Skelly that made him one of the best paid players for his age bracket, not just at Arsenal, but in world football, I imagine is being used as a reference point in discussions. Now, Nwaneri is not, of course, I don't necessarily think in the same position as Miles Lewis-Skelly to demand the same level of money. And it's also very important to separate these two, I think, at times. It's really easy to kind of bundle Nwaneri and Lewis-Skelly as a pair. They're not a pair. They are their own players. They are their own profiles. And so you can't necessarily put them in the same bracket. You know, they go through their own pathways, own development. And so for that reason, we can't expect Ethan Nwaneri to just be on the same money and always be attached to Miles Lewis-Skelly. They are their own players, own profiles. And it's as simple as that. So yeah, that's kind of where the Nwaneri stuff is at. Of course, any further updates will let you know. When I had a conversation with somebody at the club the other day, they were very calm about the situation. Arsenal are very calm about Nwaneri's future. There is hope on all sides that an agreement will be reached over a brand new contract. But right now we are at a little bit of a limbo period, and we're in a bit of a stage of the unknown as to where things are going to go. But there is optimism that he will, of course, renew his new deal. Leandro Trossard has signed with a brand new agency. He is, of course, a player that is expected to, at the moment at least, stay with the club. Whether this change of agency changes that position, whether that change of agency changes the scenario, I don't know. It's very difficult when a player signs with a new agency because you don't really know what's going to go down. You don't know what their motives are. You don't know what their advice is going to be. You don't know what their point of view, their perspective is going to be. So, yeah, I'm very intrigued, actually, to see if this has an impact on his future. But at the moment, if anyone's going to leave, it could be somebody else, of course, who we will talk about as well shortly. On the incoming side of things, Arsenal had a second bid reportedly rejected for Cristhian Mosquera, despite the fact, of course, that he turned down the contract offer from Valencia. The player has told them, of course, that he wants to join Arsenal, and that's his priority during this window. But Arsenal's second offer has also been rejected. It was thought to be just over 10 million euros, apparently, according to reports in Spain, with their first offer not even over 10 million euros. So Arsenal really lowballing Valencia at the moment, and they're holding out for a fee in the region of 20 million euros. Of course, Arsenal will hope to secure a reasonable deal. The player's contract is up at the end of next season, and Arsenal will be very wary of that and how much they pay for the player now. But he is seen as something of as a market opportunity, and Arsenal have moved to try and keep, trying to basically exploit that scenario by potentially landing a player who's worth a lot more than that. But because he only has a year left on his deal, they're going to try and, of course, secure him for much less than his actual market value. So this is one I think that eventually, hopefully, leads to a resolution where he joins. But Arsenal will be hoping to get this done as quickly and as efficiently and as monetarily fancifully as possible, if you like. Now, there is genuine interests from Saudi Arabia in Gabriel Martinelli. Ben Jacobs, of course, who has plenty of very strong contacts in the region, has reported that there could be interest with figures as high as 85 million euros, which is about 70 or so, just over 70 million pounds, in Gabriel Martinelli. Now, if you told me that we had received an offer of 70 million pounds for Gabriel Martinelli, it would be very, very, very difficult to get me to say no to that. 70 million pounds for Gabriel Martinelli is a lot of money. Very, very difficult for me to think of saying no to that amount of money, especially when that would effectively pay for the majority of a potential replacement and open up a freedom in the market for Arsenal for not just the striker position, but of course the attacking midfield role and Eberechi Eze. And there is, of course, a very key player on the market that Arsenal may indeed be able to move for. Now, Arsenal don't want to sell. That's kind of what we're at right now. Their instinct, their initial standpoint is they do not want to sell. However, there has been a feeling for a while, certainly the feeling that I've got from Arsenal for a while, that there is the potential that within the next 18 months, a big sale from Arsenal has been very realistic, and that if you look across the league and you look at clubs like Liverpool and you look at clubs like City, despite winning trophies and despite winning titles, big players at those clubs have been sold. Be that Gabriel Jesus, be that Raheem Sterling at Manchester City, as an example. Sometimes big players leave those clubs and they get big money in for those players. They reinvest that money. They replace them very efficiently. That's kind of where we're at with Arsenal and Martinelli, is the expectation that if he is to go, of course, we would be in a position to try and get maximum money for him. And it would open the door to Arsenal moving into the market for a replacement. Now, there have been reports suggesting that Arsenal have held talks with the representatives of Rodrygo. And if Arsenal were indeed successful in these talks, could land one of the best high-profile left wingers / right wingers on the market. Now, we did a poll yesterday, of course, and a large proportion of those that were on that poll, around 70% of you voted that you would rather sell Martinelli if it meant getting Rodrygo. Only about 30% of those that voted, and there was a fair few hundred of you voting on that poll. Only around 30% of you said that you wouldn't sell Martinelli even if it meant getting Rodrygo. And he is a fan favourite. He is a player that is very much liked within the fan base. He's a player I think that most people would not want to see go. But for £70 million plus, that could open the door to Arsenal adding Rodrygo, adding Eze, securing the centre forward, because a deal like that would certainly, because it's not just about money that comes in can then be reinvested. From an amortization perspective, the money that you make is on those books from now. It's not structured. It's on those books. It represents a sale of that amount of money. That's the money that you would be getting. So certainly the potential for a Martinelli out, Rodrygo in situation is very, very, very possible. And it's exciting. Like the idea of that happening, the idea that Arsenal's front three next season, front four, if you like, could be Eze or Rodrygo or both, with a new centre forward and Bukayo Saka. I mean, that is in itself a potential. That's a title challenging team for sure. And we know that Arsenal are already a title challenging team, but that's leveling things up. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section, of course, as well, as to what you think about this and about the potential of getting as much money as being suggested right now for Martinelli. You've also got to remember that the player has a say in this. You can't force a player to leave. He may not want to go to Saudi Arabia. He may not want to leave Arsenal. He may not be interested. He is, of course, a player that has a say in this as well. It's that these players are people. It's not a video game. You don't just accept the deal and it happens. But it depends upon, obviously, maybe what is being offered from a monetary standpoint that could convince him to go. But yeah, let's wait and see what happens. But it's a definite reality that this could indeed take place. But it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of big things, and it's one that I wouldn't expect to be resolved quickly. It's probably fair to say. Right, we're going to go to the next part of the show, which is going to be your questions and more for the next, however, 10 minutes or so, right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of today's show. We're certainly looking at plenty of you this morning in the chat box, which is great. And for those that maybe are tuning in for the first time, this is not the norm. I'm not usually sitting in my car doing this show. This is very much not. In fact, the sun thing does work. You can just see the sun right there. If I was to open this up, it would be blinding. Let me see if we can. If I open this up, it's going to be absolutely blinding for you for a second. Oh, here we go. How bad is it? Yeah, see, it's pretty bad. That's why I didn't have that on, because if I did, you wouldn't have been able to see anything during this whole show. So quite thankfully, I'm glad that we don't have that in the background and that you've not been blinded throughout the course of this show. But good morning to you all. There's over 2,000 of you listening, which is absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate all of you listening. Domenico says, is that a rental? No, this is my car. I did tell you a couple of months ago that I got a new car. I'm very happy with it. Very happy indeed. I will never go back to the hatchbacks of this world. I was a Vauxhall Corsa boy, but I drive a dad car these days, and I appreciate it. I've always appreciated a dad car these days. Now I've turned 30. Vishal says, I think we're making a mistake if we sell Martinelli. He's young, and a bad run of form shouldn't determine his future. There's no guarantee that Rodrygo makes it in the league as well. It's an interesting view that I don't think the majority, obviously, of people hold based upon the poll that we did yesterday. That certainly would indicate that we are not as keen on this viewpoint from Vishal as maybe some people are. In a perfect world, Arsenal would be able to get Rodrygo and have Martinelli as well. That would be the ideal scenario for Arsenal, is to have both. But I don't know how realistic that is. There's also the factor of Trossard to think about as well. And if Trossard's not going to go, or there isn't the offers for him there, then if the offers are there for Martinelli, we've got to make a decision. And that, I think, is also important. John says, pick one of Eze or Rodrygo. Eze, for me, personally. I think Eze is a brilliant signing for me. If you had to prioritise one of those two, Eze, for me, would be the one to prioritise. He adds so much quality in so many different positions for us. Premier League proven, just, his age bracket for a player who is already in the Premier League is very, I'm very comfortable with that. I don't have that same comfortability with Gyökeres, for example, playing in Portugal, but for a player playing already at a very high level in the Premier League, I don't have that same issue. I think that's fairly obvious as to why. But yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Maybe I'll put a little poll in that box now as to who you prefer. Like, who is the better signing for Arsenal? Who is the better signing? And I'll put price tags next to them as well, because that is, I guess, relevant. Who is the better signing? You've got Rodrygo for £75 million, which is what about 90 million euros is, or you've got Eze for £68 million. That should be your question. So I'm curious as to what people think. Who is the better signing? And that doesn't mean it's one or the other, by the way. I'm not saying you have to pick one or the other. I'm just saying, who of those two, for those deals, who is a better signing for Arsenal? We could get both. It's not one or the other. I'm just suggesting, to answer the question, who do you think is the better signing of the two? Martin says Eze is a squad player. He's definitely not a squad player, mate. Not at this level. He's a player that is very comfortable and capable of starting for this Arsenal team. Nathan says, as life sadly moves on, I'm concerned if Arsenal don't get a winger quickly, we'll be competing with Liverpool as well. It's an unsavoury question at this time, and I'm not really up for talking about that type of stuff, to be honest. Ruax says, I can't prioritise Eze over Rodrygo, considering their age. Rodrygo 24 and Eze 27. Rodrygo has played at a higher level. He's played at a higher level in terms of... Okay, this is an interesting question. Has he played at a higher level? He's played for a bigger club than that exists in the Premier League. But I would argue, pretty confidently, I would argue, that playing for Real Madrid does not mean that you're playing necessarily at a higher level, because the Premier League is tougher to play in than the Champions League is. Just for the record, that's my opinion. It's a harder competition to win. It's a harder competition to play in every single week. For me, the Premier League is a tougher level to play in than the Champions League. That's just me. Especially when you're playing for Crystal Palace, for the record, as well, compared to Real Madrid. So his experience playing, of course, in the European Championships with England is another one to think about. I think the Champions League is the competition I'd rather win, personally. Personally, I think it's the competition I'd rather win. But when we're talking about playing, he's playing at X level, he's playing at a higher level, so on and so forth. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that cut and dry at all between that type of argument. I really don't. I don't think. And if you disagree, that's fine. Football's about opinions, and that's what matters. Stanley says, not a good idea selling Martinelli and bringing Rodrygo in, only if we don't want to win any trophies soon. Let's just try to add Eze to our squad, a new number 9. It depends on how much money is involved. It depends on what else we do in the market. If Arsenal adds, Rodrygo, Eze, and a striker, and Martinelli leaves, they've strengthened. I don't think there's too much of a debate about that, to be fair. Proper Med says Madrid's media and fans are ruthless. Yes, because Arsenal fans are just little puppies that push over very, very easily. No pressure here, no pressure at all playing for the Arsenal. And in Mashes says, how come Arsenal haven't won a Champions League if the Champions League is easier than the Premier League? You could ask that about a lot of clubs, though. The Premier League is harder to win than the Champions League. It's 38 games. The hardest league in the world. Tougher competition. I'm sorry, but you're not going to sway me on this. The Premier League is a harder competition to win. I'd rather win the Champions League right now for Arsenal because we've not won one. That's the only reason why I'd rather win the Champions League. But the reality is that, and you can also put this into context, playing for Real Madrid, and of course he was bought from the Brazilian leagues and developed through there and established himself there. But you could argue that he's on the perfect platform, playing for Real Madrid. This is a La Liga fan right here. I'm a massive fan of La Liga, but Eze is on average coming up against tougher opposition every single week than Real Madrid do. They just are. Eze comes up against tougher opponents on average every single week than Rodrygo does. I'd love for someone to explain to me why that's not the case. I'd love somebody to. I really, really would. I'd love for someone to tell me that Rodrygo and explain to me that Rodrygo faces tougher opponents than Eze on average every week, because I don't think he does. I just don't think he does. That's my view. Jack says cup competitions can be decided and won by teams who are in and out of form. If you're out of form in the league for a set amount of time, you don't win it. So winning the league is much harder. Ryan says, on average, defenders are better in the Premier League. Gooner Jones says, people think Rodrygo is this X-factor signing only because he plays for Madrid. He is a good player, but not much different in quality between him and Martinelli. I think he's better than Martinelli, personally. I think he is an upgrade on Martinelli. But yeah, Carl says, between playing for Real Madrid and Palace, which one is much? That's not the question we're asking. If you want to say who is under the most pressure, Real Madrid, no doubt. That's not the question we're asking, Kyle, here. It's not the question we're answering. The question is, who is coming up against, on average, tougher opponents each week? Who is coming up against tougher opponents? And please explain to me why it's not Eze. I'd love to know. Because I can see people in the chat box, like Lawrence, for instance, who seems to only be able to put a word or two in the chat box, never can explain his opinions. I'd love to know the reason why. Lassie says, I remember Eze not so good at the start of last season, and Rodrygo is an absolute baller, and I love him to come to Arsenal as well. If we have a quick look at, if we're doing a comparison between the two, FB Ref, let's have a quick look, shall we? My internet's not the best here, so this might not be as quick as usual. But obviously, they're different types of players playing in different roles and different positions for their respective clubs in different contexts as well. You've got the more, I think the player that's more capable of producing kind of those magic moments, we've seen that more so from Eze, but you'd say that Rodrygo's perhaps delivering those goals on a more consistent basis. Last season for Real Madrid, Rodrygo got 6 goals and 5 assists. Last season for Crystal Palace, Eze got 8 goals and 8 assists last season, playing, in my opinion, against tougher opponents every weekend than what Rodrygo is coming up against. Because you have to remember that Rodrygo is not playing against Real Madrid. When you play for Real Madrid, it takes out one of the biggest opponents he has to face every single weekend. You know, if you're playing for another team in Spain, that's not the case. But if you play for Real Madrid, you're not facing Real Madrid. Whereas if you're playing for Crystal Palace, you're playing against all 6 of the big 6, plus, of course, the players that have ousted a number of those teams, of course, from it over the last few seasons. The teams that finished 16th, or was it 15th and 17th, the Premier League last season, are the teams that beat those European sides to the Europa League final. Simple as this. Ruak says, I can't believe this. This seems to be one of my more controversial takes. And I'm fine with that. It's about time that we actually started disagreeing on stuff, people. Anna Shiba says, stop justifying your shocking take. I'm not going to budge on this. I am not budging on this. Eze faces tougher opponents on average every week than Rodrygo does. And you will not convince me otherwise. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. And until someone actually stops using words like this is a bad take, terrible take, rubbish take, that's fine. You can disagree with me. But I'd love for somebody to actually explain why it's a bad take. Lawrence says, at a big club, you have to show and maintain a high level of performance. You have to be the best. So the argument is, Lawrence, that if that's the case, and Rodrygo has now been dropped by Xabi Alonso as a result and is being used sparingly in his first few games, has he then failed? Based on your metric and your argument, Rodrygo is being dropped right now for Xabi Alonso. And so for that reason, is he then not delivering? Has he not delivered? And that's why he is now potentially available this summer, because he hasn't maintained a high enough level of performance. Now, I personally don't think that's the case. I think that there are reasons as to why he's not there. But based on your argument, Lawrence, alone, and tactical decision doesn't cut it. They're just words. You're not explaining anything. If your argument is that at a big club like Real Madrid, you have to maintain a high level of performance, you have to be the best, and then you're in a position whereby potentially a 17-year-old signing or a young 20-year-old in Arda or Federico Valverde, who is not a right winger but can play there, is getting picked ahead of you on a consistent basis by a brand new coach. I'm sorry, but no. Proper Medge has gone completely the wrong way of this argument. It says, based on your argument, we should have gone for Chris Wood. I'm not sure why you'd sign a well over 30 goalkeeper at this stage, Proper Medge, but if that's the way you've interpreted it, you're absolutely entitled to that. Lawrence says, I can't type it all. Why? Here's Adji, who's come on with and taken the time to type out a very strong comment here. Eze comes across tougher opponents every week because Rodrygo in La Liga has to prove himself while playing against bigger teams like Barcelona and maybe the Champions League. But on average, the Premier League is tougher. Thank you, Adji, for taking the time to write it all out. Elliot says, in terms of prestige, the Champions League is bigger competition, but in terms of difficulty, the Premier League is a tougher competition. Vishal says, lol, facts. Tom, mid-table teams like Forest, Brighton and Bournemouth and Brentford have better squads than mid-table teams in La Liga. The squad for squad, the Premier League is better than La Liga. And I know that this has turned into a whole like La Liga versus the Premier League type thing. And that was never the intention of this conversation. All that I said and pointed out is that this idea that Rodrygo has been playing at a higher level, I get it in terms of pressure and I get it in terms of prestige, but I don't get it in terms of the difficulty of the opposition that they are facing on a weekly basis. I don't agree with that. I don't agree that Rodrygo, on average, is facing a higher level of opposition every week than Eze is. He's just not. He just isn't. In fact, as I've pointed out, Rodrygo is of the benefit of facing less of the high-profile teams in La Liga because he plays for one of, if not the most high-profile club, not just in La Liga, but the world. So this whole deal with people just like, because that's how it works on social media, you hear something you disagree with, instead of actually writing out an explained opinion, you just put L, rubbish, can't believe this, bad take, like a 12-year-old. Instead, what we could do is have a reasonable discussion about why you think that's not the case, like some people are taking the time to in the chat. But no, people are just a little bit weird online these days and only find the way to write L, bad take, rubbish. So, it is. Makes you look worse. Chino says, probably have to agree that we have to let Tommy go, sadly. Was injured far too much and didn't play last season. Getting someone in instead can cover for our starting. I think that's what Mosquera is, though, Chino. I think Mosquera is coming in. He will be the Tomiyasu replacement. He will add that depth and youth and mobility and strength and speed. Still raw, still needs to develop, still has to improve, definitely. But, for me, from that point of view, I personally think that Mosquera is coming in to be that player. Ryan says, Tom, do you see Jorginho and Partey swap for Zubimendi and Norgard as a big upgrade? I don't see it as a big upgrade. I see it as a improvement and the next stage of the evolution of Arsenal's midfield. For me, Zubimendi, I think, is going to prove to be a better player than obviously what Partey is right now. 32-year-old Partey next season, as opposed to a 26-year-old Zubimendi. I don't think there's much contest there as to what we're going to get more from next season, barring, of course, some ridiculous injury. Norgard, again, has really showcased his quality over the last few years. Those that have been long-time listeners of the channel will know that we used to do videos on Arsenal's midfield, and Norgard was a player that I felt I was alone really in talking about as somebody. So maybe I'm a little bit biased because I've appreciated Norgard for a little while, but I do think Arsenal have positioned themselves very well for their midfield next season, and I'm really not that bothered about the kind of the Partey exit. That's just not something that bothers me at all. E says, I've never been peed off with the cold ever again. This is just a joke now. It is pretty warm here in the UK. So yeah, don't ever be moaning about the cold these days. This is warm weather. I'm sitting in a car, baking in it right now, doing a show for you. David says, how does this impact how you evaluate Mosquera? It doesn't really, because I was always under the assumption that Tomiyasu wasn't going to play. So Mosquera has to come in and be that player for us. There's not much else to it than that. That is what we have to expect. That is what we are expecting, of course, from this. Ibiabuchi says, Rodrygo being dropped might also have to do with wanting to play on the left wing, and not many people will displace Vinicius Jr. Well, he's played right wing the majority of his time there. Vinicius Jr. is still there. So why does that change? Again, I think, if the argument is that you have to deliver on a consistent basis to play at that level and has now been dropped, but now all of a sudden that's tactical reason. It is funny, isn't it? Like, as soon as somebody's argument kind of collapses, it's now tactical reasons. It can't be anything else, despite the fact that he delivered 6 goals, 5 assists last season. Season before that, much better. 10 goals, 5 assists. Season before that, 9 goals, 8 assists. If anything, he's gone from 17 goal contributions in La Liga to 15 goal contributions in La Liga to 11 goal contributions in La Liga. That's not that way. That's that way. But I still think there's a really good player that could be unlocked at Arsenal. I still think he would offer more than Martinelli has been offered. And I still think he could certainly add plenty to the club. It would be a great signing, I think, for us, even though the numbers aren't going in the right direction right now, which is a little bit of a concern. A little bit of a concern. But playing time, as in Dubio, has dropped. So that's a really good point. So let's have a quick look at... Okay, so yes, playing time has dropped, but this, I'm sorry, is going to destroy that argument. Per 90, goals and assists, 2 seasons ago, 0.64. Season before last, 0.57. Last season, 0.51. So even when you take minutes into consideration, it's still a downward slope for goal contributions, unfortunately. So I get that, yes, he's played less minutes, but he has also delivered less in the minutes that he's getting. So, yeah, sorry. It still doesn't work. And that's why we do these things live, because had it have been the other way, then we could have had a different type of conversation. So it's good to do these things and react to them in time. Major Lee says, more questions on Tomiyasu. Why didn't Arsenal let him stay and rehab like El Neni? If Saudi are open to talks with Tommy, why didn't they submit an offer? They might have done. We don't know. It was also, you got to have discussions with the player. Each case is different. We don't know what conversations have taken place. When the El Neni situation happened, that injury happened really towards the end of the season. Tomiyasu's in a different place right now, whereby he could, of course, return in 4 to 5 months, which would not mean the January window. It would be before that. It would be October, November, December. So it could be that if he manages to sign for a club during the summer window, that he could return before January. He could establish himself at a club at this point. He's a lot younger than what Elneny was when he left. There's a number of reasons why there's a difference between those two scenarios. Elneny had been at the club a lot longer, was definitely, part of the fabric here, and wasn't necessarily going to take a step to a more competitive level, like, of course, we could see with what's his face, with Tomiyasu. He could potentially get a decent move still at this point of his career if he can stay fit. Tulip says, if we do sell Gabby for 70 to 80 million, do you think we should make an 110 million bid for Isak to test the waters? No, I don't think he's going anywhere. Clive says, maybe Tomiyasu found it mentally tough being in the UK and not being able to perform his job. It's mutual. Which I think is a really good point. You've got to think about the player on the human level, as well. He's been a great servant to Arsenal. I've got all the time in the world for Tomiyasu. He's a lovely bloke whenever I've spoken to him. I can't speak more highly of him. It's absolutely a frustration that he's not managed to, deliver and be available for us. But that is just the reality of that situation, for him. Just by the way, if you want to know Eze's numbers from the last 3 seasons, he's gone from 14 goals and assists to 15 goals and assists to 16 goals and assists. So, anyway, thank you. I didn't realize this would be as much of a controversial show as it turned out to be. Although, from the way in which I think we've explained ourselves, maybe not so controversial after all. But if you can explain to me in the comment section down below why Rodrygo faces, on average, more difficult opponents every single week compared to Eze, I personally don't think so. I think Eze faces, on average, did more difficult opponents every single week compared to Rodrygo. I like both players. I'd sign both players, but that argument in particular, I'd love to know. I really would love to know. Thank you so much as always for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. Stay well. I'll be back with you here in the car tomorrow. One more day, then back in the studio on Sunday. But thank you so much to the more than 2,000 of you that have tuned in. Absolutely amazing. 2,000 people watching a guy in a car. Crazy. Do drop a like. We try and get to 1,000 every single day, and it really would help us out if you do. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. Look after your loved ones, and as always, up the arse.